World War II, the largest war in human history. 1. The war began on September 1, 1939, when Germany invaded Poland. World War II officially began when Nazi Germany, under Adolf Hitler, launched a full-scale invasion of Poland on September 1, 1939. The attack came after years of escalating aggression by Germany, which had already annexed Austria in 1938 and seized Czechoslovakia in early 1939. Hitler claimed the invasion was a defensive act, staging false Polish attacks on German territory to justify military action. In reality, it was part of his plan to expand eastward and gain Lebensraum, or living space, for the German people. The invasion itself was swift and brutal. Germany used its new Blitzkrieg strategy, lightning war, which relied on fast-moving tanks, motorized infantry, and devastating airstrikes to overwhelm enemy defenses before they could mount an organized resistance. Poland's army, though brave, was outnumbered and outgunned, especially in the air where the German Luftwaffe dominated the skies. Within weeks, major Polish cities had fallen, including Warsaw, which endured heavy bombing before surrendering on September 27. The invasion also revealed the secret deal between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union, the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. Signed in August 1939, it included a hidden clause to divide Poland between the two powers. On September 17, the Soviet Union invaded from the east, sealing Poland's fate. Britain and France, bound by treaty to defend Poland, declared war on Germany on September 3, but they did little to stop the attack directly. This chain of events ignited a global conflict that would rage for 6 years. 2. Over 100 million people from more than 30 countries were directly involved. World War II was truly a global conflict, unlike anything the world had ever seen before. More than 30 nations participated directly, and their combined military forces totaled over 100 million soldiers. This massive mobilization meant that the war touched nearly every continent, with battles fought in Europe, Africa, Asia, and the Pacific. It wasn't just a European or Asian conflict, it was a war that spanned the entire globe. For the Allied powers, countries like the United States, the Soviet Union, the United Kingdom, and China played central roles. On the other side, the Axis powers were led by Germany, Italy, and Japan, with smaller nations such as Hungary, Romania, and Finland also aligning with them. Colonies and territories were drawn into the war as well. For example, Indian troops fought for the British Empire, while African colonies provided soldiers and resources. This made the conflict truly international, as millions of people who had never set foot in Europe or Japan found themselves fighting in distant lands. The involvement of so many nations also transformed economies and societies. Civilians were drafted into military service, factories converted to weapons production, and entire populations were put on war footing. Rationing, propaganda campaigns, and total economic mobilization became the norm. This massive participation and mobilization explain why World War II is often referred to as a total war. It required the complete involvement of nations, not just their armies, but also their citizens, industries, and resources. 3. It was the deadliest conflict in human history, causing an estimated 70 to 85 million deaths. World War II left behind an unimaginable human cost. Between 70 and 85 million people died as a direct result of combat, bombings, starvation, genocide, and disease caused by the war. This represented roughly 3% of the global population at the time. Unlike previous conflicts, World War II blurred the line between soldiers and civilians. Millions of non-combatants became targets due to aerial bombing campaigns, scorched earth policies, and systematic genocide. The Holocaust stands out as the most horrific example of state-sponsored killing. 6 million Jews were murdered in concentration camps, ghettos, and mass shootings across Nazi-occupied Europe. Millions of others, including Romani people, disabled individuals, political prisoners, and Slavic civilians, were also executed. In Asia, Japanese forces carried out atrocities such as the Nanjing Massacre, where tens of thousands of Chinese civilians were slaughtered in just weeks. Civilian suffering was not accidental but often part of deliberate strategies of terror and domination. Even outside of genocide, the scale of combat itself was devastating. Battles like Stalingrad and Okinawa saw hundreds of thousands of deaths in single campaigns. Strategic bombing campaigns leveled entire cities, killing civilians en masse in places like Dresden, Tokyo, and Hamburg. Starvation and disease caused by disrupted supply chains killed millions more. The war's death toll not only illustrates the scale of destruction but also reshaped the global population, leaving behind scars that still influence the world today. 4. Germany's Blitzkrieg strategy, Lightning War, combined fast-moving tanks, planes, and infantry for shock attacks. The German military revolutionized warfare with its strategy known as Blitzkrieg, or Lightning War. Instead of the slow, grinding trench warfare of World War I, Blitzkrieg relied on speed, surprise, and overwhelming force to break through enemy defenses quickly. Tanks and mechanized infantry spearheaded the attacks, while aircraft bombed key positions and supply lines, leaving the enemy disorganized and unable to regroup. This strategy was used with stunning success in the early years of the war. In Poland, 1939, and France, 1940, German forces defeated armies that were often larger but less coordinated. The fall of France was particularly shocking. The French army was considered one of the strongest in the world, yet it collapsed in just 6 weeks under the pressure of Blitzkrieg. The Germans bypassed heavily fortified defenses like the Maginot Line by moving through Belgium and striking where the Allies least expected it. Blitzkrieg was not just about tactics but also about technology and communication. Radios in tanks allowed real-time coordination between units, giving German commanders flexibility and speed that their enemies lacked. However, as the war dragged on, Blitzkrieg became less effective. The vast distances of the Soviet Union, harsh weather, and better prepared opponents made quick victories impossible. Still, the strategy left a lasting mark on military doctrine and demonstrated the power of fast, coordinated, mechanized warfare. 5. The Battle of Britain, 1940, was the first major military campaign fought entirely in the air. After conquering France in 1940, Hitler turned his attention to Britain, the last major European power standing against him. To prepare for an invasion, Germany first needed to gain control of the skies. This led to the Battle of Britain, the first large-scale military campaign fought exclusively in the air. The German Luftwaffe launched relentless bombing raids against British airfields, factories, and eventually cities, hoping to cripple Britain's defenses and morale. The Royal Air Force, RAF, though outnumbered, put up a fierce defense. Using innovative radar technology, they could track incoming German aircraft and scramble fighters in time to intercept them. British pilots, famously referred to as the Few by Winston Churchill, flew multiple missions a day to repel the Luftwaffe. The air battles were intense, with hundreds of planes clashing in the skies over southern England. By October 1940, Germany had failed to destroy the RAF, and Hitler postponed the invasion of Britain indefinitely. The battle was a turning point. It proved that Germany could be resisted and gave Britain the confidence to continue fighting. It was also a significant morale boost for the Allies, showing that air power alone could determine the outcome of a campaign. The Battle of Britain became a symbol of courage, resilience, and the importance of technological innovation in modern warfare. 6. Operation Barbarossa, 1941, was Nazi Germany's invasion of the Soviet Union, the largest land invasion in history. On June 22, 1941, Hitler launched Operation Barbarossa, the largest military invasion ever attempted. Nearly 3 million German soldiers, supported by hundreds of thousands of troops from Axis allies, crossed into Soviet territory along a massive front stretching from the Baltic Sea in the north to the Black Sea in the south. The plan was to crush the Soviet Union quickly, capturing Moscow, Leningrad, and the oil-rich Caucasus before winter set in. Hitler believed the Soviet Union would collapse in a matter of weeks. Initially, the campaign was brutally effective. German forces advanced deep into Soviet territory, capturing millions of Red Army soldiers and inflicting horrific casualties. Entire Soviet armies were encircled and destroyed. Cities like Kiev and Smolensk fell, and the Wehrmacht appeared unstoppable. Civilians in occupied areas often faced massacres or deportation, while Einsatzgruppen, Nazi death squads, followed the army, carrying out mass shootings of Jews and other targeted groups. But the invasion's success slowed as the Soviets refused to surrender. The Red Army, despite devastating losses, reorganized and fought fiercely. By late autumn, the Germans reached the outskirts of Moscow, but freezing temperatures, stretched supply lines, and stubborn resistance stopped them. The winter of 1941–42 devastated German troops unprepared for the cold. Operation Barbarossa not only failed to deliver a quick victory but also dragged Germany into a brutal war of attrition on the Eastern Front, which would ultimately lead to its defeat. 7. The siege of Leningrad lasted nearly 900 days, causing the deaths of over 1 million civilians. In September 1941, German and Finnish forces encircled the Soviet city of Leningrad, modern-day St. Petersburg, cutting it off from the rest of the country. What followed was one of the longest and deadliest sieges in history, nearly 900 days of starvation, cold, and relentless bombardment. The Nazis intended not just to conquer the city but to destroy it entirely, starving its population into extinction. Inside the city, conditions were horrific. Food supplies quickly ran out, and rations were reduced to as little as 125 grams of bread per day, often made with sawdust or other fillers. Citizens resorted to eating pets, wallpaper paste, and even reports of cannibalism emerged as desperation deepened. Bombing raids destroyed homes, hospitals, and food depots, leaving survivors freezing during the brutal winters. Despite this, the people of Leningrad continued working in factories to produce weapons and supplies for the Red Army. The siege finally ended in January 1944 when Soviet forces broke through the German lines. By then, more than 1 million civilians had perished, most from starvation and exposure. The defense of Leningrad became a symbol of Soviet resilience and determination. Though the suffering was immense, the city never surrendered, and its survival provided hope for the Soviet Union during the darkest years of the war. 8. The Holocaust killed about 6 million Jews, along with millions of others including Romani people, disabled individuals, and political prisoners. The Holocaust was the systematic, state-sponsored genocide carried out by Nazi Germany and its collaborators between 1941 and 1945. At its core was the final solution: Hitler's plan to annihilate the Jewish population of Europe. Approximately 6 million Jews were murdered, but the victims also included Romani people, disabled individuals, political dissidents, Slavic civilians, and others deemed undesirable by the Nazi regime. The machinery of genocide was chillingly organized. Ghettos isolated Jewish populations, forcing them into overcrowded, disease-ridden conditions before mass deportations to concentration and extermination camps. Camps like Auschwitz, Treblinka, and Sobibor became centers of industrial-scale killing, with gas chambers and crematoria designed for maximum efficiency. Mobile killing squads also massacred entire communities in Eastern Europe, executing men, women, and children in mass shootings. What makes the Holocaust particularly horrifying is not only its scale but the bureaucratic precision with which it was carried out. Ordinary people, train conductors, clerks, factory managers, all played roles in maintaining the system. After the war, the Nuremberg trials exposed the details of these crimes, and the Holocaust remains one of the most profound reminders of the dangers of hatred, unchecked power, and indifference. 9. The Pearl Harbor attack, December 7, 1941, brought the United States into the war. Before December 1941, the United States had remained officially neutral in World War II, though it supplied weapons and aid to the Allies. That changed when Japan launched a surprise attack on Pearl Harbor, the American naval base in Hawaii. On the morning of December 7, over 350 Japanese aircraft attacked in 2 waves, targeting battleships, airfields, and other military installations. The goal was to cripple the U.S. Pacific Fleet, preventing American interference in Japan's expansion across Asia and the Pacific. The attack was devastating. 8 battleships were damaged, with 4 sunk, along with cruisers, destroyers, and nearly 200 aircraft destroyed on the ground. More than 2,400 Americans were killed, and over 1,000 were wounded. The attack shocked the American public, which had been divided about entering the war. President Franklin D. Roosevelt described December 7 as a date which will live in infamy, and the next day, the U.S. declared war on Japan. Just days later, Germany and Italy declared war on the United States in support of their ally, Japan. This brought the U.S. fully into World War II, both in the Pacific and European theaters. The entry of the United States shifted the balance of the war significantly. Its massive industrial capacity and manpower would play a decisive role in defeating the Axis powers. 10. D-Day, June 6, 1944, was the Allied invasion of Normandy, France, the largest amphibious invasion ever. On June 6, 1944, the Allies launched Operation Overlord, better known as D-Day, the largest seaborne invasion in history. More than 156,000 soldiers from the United States, United Kingdom, Canada, and other Allied nations stormed the beaches of Normandy, France, supported by thousands of ships, aircraft, and vehicles. The goal was to establish a foothold in Western Europe and begin the liberation of France from Nazi occupation. The invasion required meticulous planning and deception. Prior to D-Day, the Allies carried out Operation Bodyguard, a campaign of fake radio transmissions, dummy equipment, and double-agent reports to convince the Germans that the attack would come at Pas-de-Calais, not Normandy. On the day of the invasion, paratroopers were dropped behind enemy lines, naval bombardments targeted German fortifications, and waves of soldiers landed on beaches codenamed Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juno, and Sword. The fighting was intense, especially at Omaha Beach, where American forces faced heavy resistance and high casualties. Despite the challenges, the Allies secured the beaches by the end of the day. Within weeks, they brought in hundreds of thousands of reinforcements and supplies, paving the way for the liberation of Paris in August 1944. D-Day was a turning point in the war, opening a second front in Europe and signaling the beginning of the end for Nazi Germany. 11. The Battle of Stalingrad, 1942–43, was the deadliest single battle in history, with nearly 2 million casualties. The Battle of Stalingrad is often regarded as the turning point of World War II in Europe. It began in the summer of 1942 when Hitler launched an offensive to capture the Soviet city of Stalingrad, today Volgograd. The city was not only a major industrial hub on the Volga River but also symbolically important because it bore the name of Soviet leader Joseph Stalin. Hitler saw its capture as both a strategic and psychological victory that would crush Soviet morale. The fighting was brutal and unlike anything seen before. The German Luftwaffe bombed the city into rubble, but instead of making it easier to capture, the ruins turned into a perfect battleground for Soviet defenders. Street by street and building by building, soldiers fought hand-to-hand with knives, grenades, and rifles. Civilians still trapped in the city suffered alongside the soldiers, enduring starvation, freezing winters, and constant bombardment. The Soviet commander, General Vasily Chuikov, ordered his troops never to retreat, famously stating, "Not one step back." By winter, the tide turned. The Soviet Red Army launched Operation Uranus, encircling over 300,000 German troops inside Stalingrad. Hitler refused to allow them to retreat, and the Germans eventually ran out of food, ammunition, and medical supplies. On February 2, 1943, the remaining forces surrendered, marking the first major German defeat of the war. With nearly 2 million combined casualties, Stalingrad became the deadliest battle in history and shattered the myth of Nazi invincibility. 12. The Pacific Theater saw brutal island hopping campaigns, such as at Guadalcanal, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa. While Europe was engulfed in war, the Pacific Theater became the scene of a different but equally brutal struggle. After the attack on Pearl Harbor, Japan rapidly expanded across Southeast Asia and the Pacific, seizing territories including the Philippines, Malaya, and numerous islands. To push Japan back, the Allies, particularly the US, adopted a strategy known as island hopping. The idea was to capture strategically important islands, one by one, while bypassing heavily fortified positions, slowly moving closer to Japan itself. The campaign was long and bloody. At Guadalcanal in 1942, the US Marines fought a grueling 6-month battle to secure the island. Later, at Iwo Jima in 1945, American forces faced ferocious resistance from Japanese troops entrenched in underground bunkers and tunnels. The battle was so intense that nearly 7,000 Americans and over 20,000 Japanese soldiers died. Okinawa, the last major battle of the Pacific, was even deadlier, with over 200,000 casualties, including tens of thousands of civilians caught in the crossfire. The Pacific Theater highlighted the extreme determination of Japanese soldiers, many of whom refused to surrender and carried out kamikaze suicide attacks against Allied ships. For the US military, these battles shaped the decision to use atomic bombs later in 1945, as planners feared an invasion of mainland Japan would cost millions of lives. The island-hopping campaign ultimately isolated Japan, destroyed its navy, and paved the way for the war's end. 13. Codebreakers at Bletchley Park cracked Germany's Enigma code, giving the Allies a huge advantage. One of the most important but secret contributions to Allied victory came from the codebreakers at Bletchley Park in the United Kingdom. The Germans relied heavily on the Enigma machine, a sophisticated encryption device that scrambled communications into what seemed like unbreakable code. Each day, the machine's settings changed, creating trillions of possible combinations. Cracking Enigma was thought to be impossible, but the Allies did it. Led by figures like Alan Turing, a brilliant mathematician, the Bletchley team built machines, early computers, that could process possible Enigma settings at incredible speed. With captured Enigma machines and codebooks, they eventually learned how to read German military communications. This intelligence breakthrough was nicknamed Ultra. It gave the Allies insights into enemy troop movements, supply routes, and planned attacks, often allowing them to strike first or avoid traps. The importance of Bletchley's work cannot be overstated. Historians estimate that cracking Enigma shortened the war by at least 2 years and saved millions of lives. Yet the operation remained a closely guarded secret until decades after the war. Alan Turing and his team were not widely recognized in their lifetimes, but today, their work is seen as a foundation for modern computer science as well as one of the key reasons the Allies triumphed. 14. Women played a critical role, working in factories, serving as nurses, pilots, and even codebreakers. World War II was not just fought by men on the battlefield. Women played an essential role in keeping the war effort alive. With millions of men conscripted into the military, women filled jobs in factories, offices, and farms. In the United States, the cultural icon Rosie the Riveter symbolized the women who built planes, tanks, and ammunition. In Britain, women worked in munitions factories, joined the Women's Land Army, and even served as firefighters during the Blitz. Beyond industry, women also served directly in the military and intelligence services. In the US, the Women's Army Corps, WACs, and Women Air Force Service Pilots, WASPs, took on non-combat roles like ferrying planes, maintaining equipment, and running communications. In the Soviet Union, women took on combat roles more directly, serving as snipers, tank drivers, and pilots. The famous Night Witches, an all-female Soviet bomber regiment, carried out daring nighttime raids against German forces. Women also made major contributions to intelligence and code breaking. At Bletchley Park, thousands of women worked as cryptanalysts, clerks, and machine operators. In occupied Europe, female resistance fighters smuggled information, weapons, and even assassinated Nazi officers. Although women's contributions were often overlooked after the war, World War II marked a turning point in the recognition of women's capabilities in both civilian and military roles, reshaping gender roles in the decades to come. 15. The Manhattan Project developed the first atomic bombs in secret, involving over 130,000 people. One of the most ambitious and secretive projects of the war was the Manhattan Project, the US-led program to develop nuclear weapons. Begun in 1942, it involved scientists, engineers, and military personnel from the United States, United Kingdom, and Canada. Its aim was to harness the power of nuclear fission to create an unprecedented weapon, spurred by fears that Nazi Germany might develop one first. The scale of the project was staggering. Over 130,000 people worked on it, spread across secret sites in Los Alamos, New Mexico, Oak Ridge, Tennessee, and Hanford, Washington. Entire towns were built to house workers, most of whom had no idea what they were actually building. Top scientists like Robert Oppenheimer, Enrico Fermi, and Niels Bohr played central roles, working under intense secrecy. The project culminated in the successful detonation of the first nuclear device, codenamed Trinity, in the New Mexico desert on July 16, 1945. The Manhattan Project permanently changed the course of history. Within weeks of the Trinity test, the bombs developed, Little Boy and Fat Man, were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, leading to Japan's surrender. Beyond ending World War II, the project ushered in the nuclear age, with its promise of limitless energy and its terrifying potential for destruction. It also raised moral and ethical questions that continue to shape global politics today. 16. In August 1945, the US dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, killing over 100,000 instantly and forcing Japan's surrender. By the summer of 1945, Japan was on the brink of defeat but showed little sign of surrendering. The Allies feared that invading the Japanese mainland would cost millions of lives, given the fierce resistance encountered on islands like Okinawa. To avoid this, the US decided to use the atomic bomb, developed in secret under the Manhattan Project. The goal was not only to force Japan's surrender but also to demonstrate the devastating new weapon to the world. On August 6, 1945, the B-29 bomber Enola Gay dropped the bomb nicknamed Little Boy on Hiroshima. The explosion leveled the city, killing around 70,000 people instantly and tens of thousands more in the days and weeks that followed due to burns and radiation sickness. Just 3 days later, on August 9, a second bomb called Fat Man was dropped on Nagasaki, killing another 40,000 instantly. These bombings shocked the world with their unprecedented destructive power. The Japanese government, facing devastation, announced its surrender on August 15, 1945. This marked the first and only use of nuclear weapons in warfare. The bombings remain one of the most controversial decisions in history. While some argue they saved lives by ending the war quickly, others see them as unnecessary acts of mass destruction. Regardless, they ushered in the nuclear age and reshaped global politics for the rest of the 20th century. 17. Garbo, Juan Pujol García, was a double agent who tricked the Nazis with fake intelligence, convincing them to hold troops away from Normandy during D-Day. One of the most fascinating figures of World War II was Juan Pujol García, better known by his codename Garbo. Originally from Spain, he despised both fascism and communism and decided to help the Allies in his own way. Amazingly, he convinced the Nazis that he was a loyal spy working for them, while in reality, he was a double agent feeding false information to the Allies. His work became one of the greatest feats of deception in military history. Garbo invented an entire network of imaginary agents across Britain, complete with detailed backstories and false reports. He fed this information to the Germans, who believed him so completely that they awarded him the Iron Cross. Meanwhile, he secretly reported to British intelligence, who carefully crafted the lies to mislead the Nazis. His reports were so convincing that the Germans often ignored real intelligence that contradicted him. Garbo's greatest success came during Operation Fortitude, the deception campaign leading up to D-Day in 1944. He convinced the Nazis that the invasion would take place at Pas-de-Calais instead of Normandy. As a result, Hitler kept entire divisions, including powerful panzer units, stationed away from Normandy even after the landings began. This gave the Allies the time they needed to establish a foothold. Garbo's work saved countless lives and played a direct role in the success of the Normandy invasion. 18. World War II officially ended on September 2, 1945, when Japan signed the surrender documents. Although Germany had surrendered in May 1945, the war continued in the Pacific until Japan's surrender in August after the atomic bombings. The formal end of World War II came on September 2, 1945, when Japanese representatives signed the instrument of surrender aboard the USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay. The ceremony was attended by Allied leaders, including General Douglas MacArthur, who oversaw the proceedings. The signing symbolized not only the end of 6 years of global conflict but also the beginning of a new world order. Japan, once an aggressive empire, was placed under US occupation and transformed into a democratic nation under a new constitution. The war's conclusion also marked the start of massive reconstruction efforts across Europe and Asia, as nations tried to recover from the unprecedented destruction. For soldiers and civilians worldwide, the surrender brought relief but also grief. Millions had lost loved ones, cities lay in ruins, and entire societies were forever changed. The war's end was both a moment of celebration and reflection, as the world grappled with the lessons of the most devastating conflict in history. 19. After the war, the United Nations was founded in 1945 to prevent future global conflicts. The horrors of World War II convinced world leaders that a new international organization was needed to maintain peace and prevent such destruction from happening again. In October 1945, the United Nations, UN, was officially established, replacing the failed League of Nations. Its founding charter emphasized human rights, international cooperation, and collective security. The UN included a Security Council, with permanent members, the United States, Soviet Union, United Kingdom, France, and China, given veto power. This was designed to ensure that the most powerful nations would participate and cooperate, rather than undermine the organization. The General Assembly allowed every member nation to have a voice, making the UN a global forum for dialogue. Since its founding, the UN has played a major role in humanitarian aid, conflict resolution, and setting international laws. While it has not always been able to prevent wars, it has provided a platform for diplomacy that helped manage tensions during the Cold War and beyond. The creation of the UN stands as one of the most enduring legacies of World War II, born out of a desire to ensure never again. 20. The war dramatically reshaped the world order, leading to the Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union. World War II did not just end with peace, it created a new global balance of power. Before the war, Britain, France, and other European empires had been dominant, but the conflict left them weakened and exhausted. In their place, two new superpowers emerged, the United States and the Soviet Union. Both had played decisive roles in defeating the Axis, but their political ideologies were vastly different: capitalism and democracy on one side, communism and authoritarianism on the other. This division quickly hardened into the Cold War, a tense rivalry that shaped international politics for nearly half a century. The US and its allies formed NATO, while the Soviet Union led the Warsaw Pact. Instead of direct war, they competed through proxy wars, espionage, nuclear arms races, and space exploration. The world was effectively divided into two spheres of influence, with Europe split by the Iron Curtain. The reshaping of the world also brought about decolonization. Former colonies in Asia and Africa gained independence in the decades after World War II, further shifting global dynamics. At the same time, new institutions like the UN, the International Monetary Fund, IMF, and the World Bank were created to stabilize and manage the post-war world. In short, World War II didn't just end one era, it laid the foundation for the modern geopolitical order that still influences our world today.